Hello, welcome to Psychanooga. I'm your co-host, James Grant.
And I'm your other co-host, Bethany Cawthorn.
Today we will be interviewing Dr. Howell. Tell us a little bit about Dr. Howell, Bethany.
Well, Dr. Howell was my psychopathology professor in spring 23, I think. But she also teaches biopsych, I think. She teaches a couple of graduate courses. Research is mainly focused on stress and anxiety, fear, stuff like that. Today, we specifically wanted to talk to her as the semester winds down and everybody is dealing with finals, studying for exams, and writing papers. We thought it would be good to get her input on how people should cope with stress, anxiety, burnout. Since she is a licensed clinical psychologist and has done lots of research on some of these topics, we thought she would be a great person to ask on the topic.
What was your favorite part of the interview?
I really liked what she was talking about burnout and to prioritize things. I thought that was some great advice. She gave a lot of good tips, I think. So I was happy to hear about that. I was very intrigued by the whole interview. I really was. What was your favorite part?
I liked how fair she was when it came to talking about normative stress.
Yeah.
And how to a certain level you need it to accomplish what you need to do and function. And when it comes to prioritizing things and doing things well, you're going to feel stress. But she talked about how going out of that normative level will be detrimental to you.
Yeah, I thought that was really great. Especially, I loved the part where she was like, I'm going to stand up for stress and anxiety for a second here. And I was like, I liked that a lot too, because that, stress and anxiety does, like she said, get a bad rep just because it can be so detrimental. I mean, even to your physical health, the things that stress can do to you is just insane. So recognizing that was really helpful, I think, because, a little bit of anxiety is good. That's what motivates you, but too much of it can actually be more of a detriment. But, so I thought that was cool too. What are your thoughts on stress and anxiety, and have you ever experienced burnout? Yeah, talk a little bit about that.
Just putting too much on your plate.
Yeah.
And we certainly live in a culture that glorifies being busy and having so much to do. I think it's really easy to just keep piling things onto your plate. And then one night you're sitting there and all 18 credit hours that you're taking have things to do, and it's like everything's falling apart.
How many credit? Are you taking 18 credit hours? I am too.
Yeah.
It is a lot. But yeah, you're right. Society really does, tell us that, we have to push and we have to do as much as we can.
Yeah.
In reality, when humans were first on this planet, they were hunter and gatherers. They woke up when the sun rose, went and hunted for their food and ate it.
Yeah. They got stressed out when a tiger appeared out of the bushes, and that got their adrenaline going.
Right.
My adrenaline gets going when I get a C on an assignment.
Yeah, exactly. Now, being stressed out over a tiger coming out of the bushes is a normal thing to be stressed out about.
Well, it's really interesting when you hear conversations about the physiological response to stress, because you hear people talk about, evolutionarily speaking, this was built in us to respond to genuine threats.
Right.
And when our body goes through that amount of stress, but for something that's not physically real in the same sense, that really hurts us.
Yeah, it's so weird how, we as a culture and society have, over time, developed these, things like anxiety that, like you said, at one time was supposed to help protect us from a genuine threat, to now, it's just, talking to somebody might make your heart race.
Yeah. Well, without any further ado, here's Dr. Howell.
So thank you, Dr. Howell, for meeting with us today. So today we're discussing stress and burnout, anxiety, and of course, as the semester is wrapping up, that is prevalent in the minds of students and faculty, for that matter. But we just wanted to get your thoughts and insight as a, coming from a clinical psychologist and such. So kind of start by telling us like a little bit like about what you do and like your research and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my area of research is in, a bit apropos, but stress and anxiety. I'm specifically interested in anxiety and fear about other people, so more interpersonal stress and fear, so things like social anxiety disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder that results following victimization. I'm also interested in social fear more broadly, such as things, what might contribute to prejudices, discrimination, which in some parts can sometimes be fear-based, and how might cross-cultural factors play a role in that as well. So at all levels, as well as how it interacts with our biology and our physiology and the way that we process information. So that's my area of research. I'm also a licensed clinical psychologist in the state of Tennessee, and I have a full-time job here at UTC, but I do have an opportunity to have a small caseload and see a few clients per week. Usually they are seeking treatment for anxiety disorders.
Okay, awesome. So how would you, going on the main topic of this episode, how do you kind of see stress and anxiety like impacting specifically like UTC students and such?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question, because it can also, the answer to that may be nuanced, based on individual differences.
Right.
So I like to, first always stand up for stress and anxiety a little bit at first when we have these types of topics, because it gets a bad rep. I think there's a lot of messages out there of just stay away from stress, stay away from anxiety. It's all bad things, but we do need it to some extent. We do need some level of stress in order to feel motivated and inspired to reach goals. Same thing with anxiety. We probably wouldn't be very productive if we never felt anxious. Right? So there's certainly that, I guess we could call normative range that is productive, that helps us to grow and stay on top of things. But then we get to some individual differences where if the anxiety or stress exceeds one's current coping skills, that's where you might start to hear maybe words or maybe observe things that are a bit more consistent with feeling like one is in crisis.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of those moments where we feel very overwhelmed. We're not really sure how to cope with all of the demands on us, and it can actually be counterproductive. We may freeze or respond in ways that aren't as possibly as helpful.
Yeah.
You talked earlier about your research being mostly in social stress.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to student and work life, how much of a role does that social stress kind of combine with sometimes work or studying, class stress and stuff like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something else that can be looked at from a lot of different layers. So of course there's the people that you may live with. That's a pretty direct contact when it comes to whether or not there's a good match, so to speak, with one's roommates. I know for me personally, when I was in college, there were some that were a better match than others, right?
Definitely.
And then, you also have your fellow students and classmates. And I think one of the most remarkable things about being a college student is the opportunity to meet people who are different from you and to have the opportunity to engage in dialogue about things, and not only to specialize in information, but also to broaden our perspectives and horizons and communication skills. But, that can be a little challenging at times. And so when it comes to interpersonal relationships, there's certainly a number of things that can negatively contribute to stress. But there's also protective factors in that too. Just being able to get validation that, yeah, that is really stressful. Like that can mean a lot. Or just having someone to give advice if you want it, or even just, I don't know, a hug, to listen. That can be that can be a huge protective factor against stress. Our crew or tribe, people who are there to support us.
Yeah, for sure. What are some other ways that you would suggest people cope with stress and anxiety?
Mm-hmm. You may want to think about it from, different perspectives. Okay, what about from a, biological or a physiological perspective? Because stress is very top to bottom. We feel it in our bodies, etc. So I guess the first thing is just, I know some people may roll their eyes when I say this. I used to as well when I was just I don't know, a lover of stress for some reason. I would just rack it on. But am I taking care of myself?
Yeah.
And, am I sleeping? What am I eating? Am I exercising? And those are things that, there is hard data to indicate that those things play a really important role in not only just general well-being, but also our capacity to manage stress and resilience. Another is, the social factors. So we're a social species, and our well-being lies a lot in our social structures and our connectedness. So sometimes we may want to reflect on, how connected do I feel? Am I feeling isolated? Am I feeling alone in these moments? Because feelings like anxiety, guilt, shame, those types of things thrive in isolation. And it can become a bit of an echo chamber. I think we all have been there at some point where if, we're with those feelings, it just kind of compounds on itself. But maybe if we talk to someone else, it can shed a light on it. And maybe part of that can be validated, or sometimes you're like, well, maybe it's not as embarrassing or shameful or scary as maybe it was shouting in the megaphone, so to speak. And then also, what are my perspectives? So sometimes things that cause stress have immediate solutions. Okay, so when that's the case, I think maybe we can try to problem solve and think, what are some things I can do about it right now? Sometimes sources of stress don't have immediate solutions, or maybe it's kind of a long-term, sort of long burn kind of solution, or maybe they're just not available right then. So we can also ask ourselves, how am I thinking about it? That can really shape our feelings, a sense of agency versus a sense of hopelessness or helplessness. And sometimes that might depend on maybe some radical acceptance, not acceptance of, it's just going to be this way for forever and there's nothing I can do about it, but rather, okay, this is here. I recognize that this is happening in my life, but I will also make the commitment that if I start to see some solutions coming up, that I can really lean into my resources and try to address this the best that I can. So I guess in summary, our biology, our psychology, how we're interpreting and responding to these events, and also our social structures, or I guess the big three that I would recommend paying attention to.
Like the biopsychosocial triangle.
Yeah, the biopsychosocial triangle, correct.
Good reference. One of our topics for this episode is burnout. I like the example you gave earlier of like a normative level of stress. Do you think burnout usually occurs when we're outside of that normative level for too long?
Yeah, I mean, there's only so much energy as a resource, and we're actually talking about stress right now in my biological psychology class. So shout out if you're hearing this. But, we've been talking about some models that have been proposed out there with regard to just these exhaustion phases. So when we're first faced with some sort of threat, either to safety or integrity or to something that's important to us, things like adrenaline or stress cortisol are released in order to just stay attentive and to look out for solutions or things that we might need to do. So it kind of puts us on alert. Now, if there's chronically high levels of stress cortisol, usually when there's just not a lot of solutions at the time, or maybe there's just too much at the moment, right? Then that can have these downstream effects on things like our immune system. We might find ourselves getting sick more easily, or healing is a bit slower, or gastrointestinal issues, etc. Increased risk for heart disease. But when it comes to burnout, that's usually a pretty big red flag. Maybe I should, this is a good time to pause and reevaluate what are the most important things to me right now. What are my top values? And as I'm going through this list of all of these demands that are on me, is this right here in this list, does it feed my values or not so much? Or is it possibly even taking away from it? Now, I mean, I can relate personally with burnout. So, I went really hard in graduate school. I even got feedback from an advisor too that they were worried that I was going to burn out. Because I wasn't taking care of myself with regard to, sleep or, maybe taking a break from work at times, because I was just so interested. I was really passionate about the topic. And so I had almost kind of like this, it was just an insatiable drive, because I was really interested in it. And then there came a point where I needed I needed to take a step back and kind of reevaluate what are my values. So like friends, family. Okay, when's the last time I actually called, my best friend, who's out of state? When's the last time I had a good long conversation, with my mom? And, this was back, when I was, and so in graduate school when I was reflecting on these things, and if I get a phone call, do I get kind of like, oh, yay, or is it like, oh my gosh, I have this other work, and like just seeing the call kind of stresses me out, right? So that was a sign to me of, okay, hold on. Yes, my academics and my passion for this topic is really important as part of my values, but also is it eating into some other areas? And I think when we put all of our eggs in one basket, so to speak, to feed our soul, and something goes awry, then we can be kind of feel a bit stuck when that's the case. So I guess long story short, yeah, I mean, burnout, it's definitely a real thing. But I think there are some steps that we can take in order to kind of reflect and feel mindful. And, you know, not only in our things like schoolwork or other things, but even just, there's been a lot of, I think, political burnout.
Yeah. Yes.
Across the country, like regardless of,
Right.
you know, people's perspectives. And I think we're seeing some, you know, some exhaustion in there too.
Definitely.
And, you know, just being able to have conversations. Yeah.
So I loved all of that, and I loved your personal anecdote on that, because I know, like, as college students especially, like, I mean, like, I graduate next month, so, you know, that's definitely on my mind. But when you're facing those, like, feelings of burnout, and you're like, I know I need to step back, but, like, maybe you there's not necessarily, like, something that you can technically cut back on. Like, you know, let's say you've got school, you've got work, you've got some, like, an internship, you know, something like that,
Yeah.
to where you can't realistically, like, drop anything.
Yeah.
What would you suggest people do if they find themselves in that kind of situation?
Oh, no, I mean, that's a good question. And it's not a question of if, but like when we find ourselves in those types of situations in life where there's a number of demands, but I think it's important for us to be fair and realistic with ourselves, because there's literally only so much time and and the time-space continuum, right? Unless you've figured out a way how to manipulate it, in which case let's start a company.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's talk about that.
You probably wouldn't even need a college degree if you could figure out how to invent that. But I think there's, I guess when I see a lot of students in that position of high stress at the brink of burnout, a lot of times there's these expectations of, like, I have to excel at everything. And I think, I don't know if it was a meme or a saying, but I liked it. It said you can excel at anything, but not everything.
Yeah, that is a very good.
I liked it. It made me pause, and I read it a couple of times again. And so, you know, let's say there's someone's working, you know, full time during a semester, and they're taking a challenging course. You know, like, okay, well, something's gotta give, you know, and maybe one can feel, you know, compassionate towards oneself. It's like, hey, let me just pass this class.
Yeah.
Like, that's the goal. Let me just, like, pass this. But it can also depend on what that student's ultimate goals are. So, you know, what is your purpose for college? Like, is it to, you know, if you're wanting to pursue a career where they are a lot more interested in things like internship experiences and whatnot, and as long as you have that degree that don't really care about GPA, then obviously I'd say, you know, maybe put a little bit more of that focus in, you know, the experiences and work experience, and just try to pass.
Yeah.
But if someone is wanting they need to go to graduate school, or there's a lot more emphasis on things like GPA and, you know, networking or building relationships with professors, then one may want to, you know, kind of think about in that direction. But I think at the end of the day, when it comes to our emotional and psychological experience, it's just being fair with oneself and, sometimes it can be harder to do towards ourselves. So sometimes it can be helpful to think, well, what if someone I knew, expressed the same concern to me? Like, what advice would I give them? Because I don't know about you, but I tend to be a lot more, more rational and empathetic when I'm giving advice to someone else versus when I'm trying to, I don't know, pep talk myself, which I think is a common experience that people have.
Definitely. I've even seen that in my own self, like trying to, give a pep talk is a lot easier when I'm like trying to separate myself from the situation. I'm like, okay, what would I say if this was a friend of mine other than me personally? So I really like that tidbit. Okay. Well, do you have any final thoughts on the topic that you'd like to share with students about handling stress, burnout, anxiety?
I guess know that this is an environment that is based on that thrives on the notion of support and mentorship. I don't think that the academic experience is meant to be lonely or alone.
Definitely,
And if you're feeling like that with regard to the your academic experience, I encourage you to maybe try to talk to an instructor, or talk to a mentor, or maybe some other students. Like, hey, are you kind of feeling this way as well? And if they do, it can provide some validation. And if you're finding that your feelings are a little bit off the general average, then maybe it can also prompt things like, okay, well, how is there some perspective here that I can take a look at? But yeah, I guess overall, the camaraderie and the support that can come in an academic environment or college or university environment is something that I hope everyone at least tries to lean into, or to try to fully utilize as a resource.
Yeah, of course. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Howell.
Yes,
Well, thank
you.
you.
And thank you guys so much for listening. This has been Bethany Cawthorn.
And James Grant.
Join us next time on Psychanooga.